said, my name is Larry McDaniel, and my research is Afrocentric curricula. Is it a powerful enough force to curtail negative classroom behavior? So why Afrocentric curricula? Well, my interest stems from an obscure saying that I heard over and over again as a child. Various elders within my community would often say, if you knew better, you do better. As a child, I had no idea what this meant, but it's something that stuck with me to my adulthood. As recently as last year, I considered the context of the saying to be centered on knowledge of African American history and contemporary issues that plague the community. So my research questions are, can a consistent classroom discourse on relevant curriculum to one's ethnic group, specifically African Americans in this case, curtail or positively shift the behavior of African American adolescent students? If so, what are the dynamics behind this shift? And if not, what are the dynamics that impede it? So before going any further, let us define Afrocentric curricula. Afrocentric curricula, in this case, in modern terms, is talking about culturally relevant pedagogy, which takes into account the cultural experiences and history of African American students. To speak to that some, we know that for a fact African American students have a distinctly different experience in schools than other ethnic groups. There are very stark educational disparities for these students that culturally relevant pedagogy attempts to mitigate, and this directly reflects behavior and disciplinary issues. For example, African American students are more likely to be disciplined and expelled from schools than other ethnic groups. So here we have a graph on student suspensions and expulsions by race and ethnicity. If you point your attention to the red bars, you see that African Americans make up 16% of student enrollment in the U.S. But they also make up 32% of in-school suspensions, which is double that number. 33% of out-of-school suspensions for a single offense, 42% of out-of-school suspensions, multiple offenses, and 34% of expulsions. These disciplinary percentages double their population percentage, which clearly illustrates how African American students are disproportionately disciplined. Now, the purpose of this research is not to suggest that African American students are intrinsically ill-behaved. However, it is to acknowledge these disciplinary disparities and come to an understanding on if Afrocentric curricula can curtail negative behavior. So let us define negative behavior. In order to measure this, we must come up with a consistent definition. I interviewed instructors and compiled a list of behaviors that they have witnessed in their classes. What was elocuted to me was disengaged from lecture, challenging authority, verbal jokes, and mute humorous actions. I kept track of these behaviors as well as others to make sure that my observations aligned with what came forth in the teacher interviews. Just to give you an idea of how much I saw these behaviors, the figures are displayed here and are disaggregated by gender. As you can see, I saw quite a few of these behaviors over the span of my summer observations. So I conducted my study within an African American Studies department at a local Bay Area high school. As elocuted to me by the department chair, their mission is to encourage students to strive for excellence and embrace the attributes of African American spirit. That spirit stands for strength, perseverance, responsibility, integrity, and talent. That mission is to create a positive identity, purpose, and direction for African American students, which I feel aligned quite nicely with the elder saying, if you knew better, you do better. Over the course of my time in my research site, I employed mixed qualitative methods for collecting data. I observed 6 classes as a non-participant and conducted teacher and faculty interviews. So my work is still ongoing in terms of thinking of the effects of Afrocentric curricula, but so far 2 things have become very apparent: gender relevancy and external stresses. So let us look at gender relevancy first. During my observations, I have found that when the material is presented and it's relevant to students' ethnicity and also their gender, students were more willing to adhere to the class conduct rules and to fully engage in the curriculum. In these instances, Students who typically display negative behavior transition to positive classroom behavior. The following excerpts will be read from my field notes and are examples of this changeover in behavior. During the unit on African American male stereotypes, Derek, who normally is considered the class clown, displayed completely opposite behavior. As Ms. Baker spoke of the origins of these stereotypes and how they shape societal views of African American males, Derek was fully engaged, showing a positive shift in behavior. Now, on a typical day, Derek is disengaged from lecture and he disrupts his class peers. However, when the curricula focused on both his ethnicity and his gender, he fully engaged. During this unit, he was an active listener, he asked questions, he shared experiences, and he abided by the class rules. Another example of gender relevancy occurred during a class-wide fishbowl discussion. As the class discussed the economics of black hair, the girls feverishly contributed. However, there was only one black male student actively listening, eyes on the speaker. The remaining 8 boys chatted amongst themselves, drew on their desks, texted on their phones, and stared off in space. This example shows how the curricula was not relevant to the boys, thus it failed to engage them, ultimately not curtailing their negative behavior. The girls, on the other hand, were fully invested in the conversation, maintaining engagement and positive behavior throughout the duration of the lecture. So on one hand, the moments in which behavior was curtailed by the engagement in the materials had everything to do with cultural relevance, which was hinged on gender cultural relevance. But yet, during my observations, there were moments where it could not curtail negative behavior. This tended to have to do with the moments in which external stresses complicated the effects of the curricula. During a teacher interview, I asked if Afrocentric curricula could curtail students' negative behavior. One teacher had this response: "You know what? I don't know. This stuff is good stuff, but these kids are dealing with so much. A lot of these kids got problems at home and it's hard for them to even focus on what's going on in the class." This quote led me to shift my focus during my observations and to look out for these instances. And because of this shift, it allowed me to observe a few interactions that exhibited how external stresses impact the effects of Afrocentric curricula. The following excerpt I will read from my field notes. Earlier in class, Ms. Baker took Brandon's headphones because he was listening to music during her instruction. After class, he demanded his headphones back. He began verbally abusing Ms. Baker. She interrupted his harassment and reminded him of today's lesson. "Brandon," she yelled, "what did we just talk about? Black male stereotypes, right? We just talked about black men being seen as angry, as brutes, as people who are violent. Don't be that stereotype. I will give you back your headphones tomorrow." As you can see, the curriculum for this day was gender relevant to Brandon. Despite this, his behavior was not altered. Shortly after this initial interaction, Ms. Baker called the security on Brandon, and while waiting for them, Brandon confessed that today was his birthday. "Today has been a shitty day since I woke up," he said. "It's my fucking birthday. My grandpa, grandma, no one in my house wished me a happy birthday. No one loves me. I just want my headphones so I can get in my zone. I ain't from this area. Don't no one understand it." This right here is a clear example of how external stress has superseded Afrocentric curricula despite the curricula being relevant to Brandon's ethnicity and to his gender. Because of familial stress, his negative behavior continued, and he was not able to engage the curriculum and shift behavior. So in conclusion, my preliminary findings from this study show that Afrocentric curricula can curtail negative behavior so long as the curriculum is gender relevant. Also, as seen through my observations, the data illustrates that even when curricula is gender relevant, external stresses can complicate and at times supersede the effects of the curricula. This preliminary research is important to public discourse because it suggests that there is a hierarchy of factors that affect a student's in-class behavior. Additionally, this research sheds further light on how educational policymakers should consider broadening and redefining the traditional mission of schools, turning schools into a source of social support. This support would help mitigate external stresses for students, which in turn would allow them to better engage curricula and change behavior. It is important to acknowledge the limitations of this study. With only a summer to be in the field, my findings focus on short-term curricular effects and do not take into account long-term effects. Although it is clear that gender and external stress play a huge role in affecting students' in-class behavior, Afrocentric curriculum may play an even more significant role further down the road for these students. Longitudinal research would be the preferred method to mitigate this limitation. Additionally, it would also be a benefit to observe the same students in non-Afrocentric classes in order to gauge behavior in non-culturally relevant spaces. So I would just like to thank the University of California, Berkeley for this opportunity, the Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship for the opportunity, Program Director Leah Carroll, CERF Advisor Crystal Strong, Faculty Mentor Kristen Luker, and the Weshing donors. Thank you.